Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you've known your entire life, only to realize that the soul behind them had been completely hollowed out, replaced by an ancient, predatory hunger? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you are a fan of true, bone-chilling horror and deep wilderness mysteries that defy human explanation, you are in the right place. Before we dive into this dark account, please take a second to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and drop a comment below sharing your own unexplainable forest encounters. Your engagement helps the channel grow and it keeps the nightmares alive. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and prepare yourselves. Let's begin. Part 1. My name is Logan. For over 12 years, I served as a wilderness EMT and search and rescue coordinator in the rugged high desert backcountry of San Juan County. I've tracking missing hikers through treacherous terrain, handled severe wildlife attacks, and recovered bodies that had been left to the elements for weeks. I thought I had seen the absolute worst the wilderness could inflict on a human being. But nothing in my professional training or life experience could have ever prepared me for the horror I witnessed. To truly understand the terrifying gravity of what happened, I have to take you back to my childhood. It was the summer of 1994 and I was just 10 years old. My younger brother, Tyler, who was 8 at the time, and I were staying at our grandparents' isolated ranch near the Navajo reservation borders. My grandfather was a quiet, observant man who didn't tell stories the traditional way. He dropped fragments of warnings while working on his truck or cleaning his tools, expecting you to listen carefully. One blistering afternoon, as he was skinning a rabbit on an overturned bucket, he paused and looked at me with an intensity that made my throat tighten. "Logan," he said, his voice dropping to a low whisper, "do you know why we never whistle after dark?" I shook my head, suddenly feeling cold despite the summer heat. "Whistling calls things," he warned, his hands never shaking as he precisely worked the blade. "Most of the time nothing answers. But sometimes something does. There are ancient entities out here. Beings that walk the dark paths to gain unnatural power. They discard their humanity to wear the skins of others, coyote, owl, deer, and even people. If you ever see something that doesn't move right or sounds slightly off, even if it looks exactly like your brother or your parents, you do not hesitate. You run." That warning echoed in my mind that very night as I lay awake in the small, shadow-drenched bedroom I shared with Tyler. The window was open to catch the night breeze. At precisely 2:45 a.m., a sharp, rhythmic scratching sound echoed against the window screen. It sounded like thick, human fingernails dragging across the metal mesh, testing its strength. Along with the scratching came a foul, suffocating odor, the unmistakable smell of roadkill rotting under the summer sun. I froze beneath my sheets, barely daring to breathe. Then a voice drifted through the mesh. It sounded exactly like my grandmother, but the cadence was completely flat, entirely devoid of human emotion. "Let me in," it whispered. Terrified, I bolted from the bed, slammed the heavy wooden window shut, and locked it. From the darkness outside, a sound echoed that was neither a laugh nor a growl, followed by the heavy thudding of footsteps padding away into the dirt. The next morning, deep gouges were carved into the screen, and the metal frame was bent inward. My grandfather didn't say a single word. He simply replaced the screen and hung bundles of protective herbs over every door. Whatever it was, it didn't return to that ranch. But the wilderness has a terrifyingly long memory. 12 days after that incident, our family dog, a loyal black and white mutt named Shadow, vanished from our suburban backyard without a trace. Tyler and I were devastated. We plastered the neighborhood with flyers, checked the local shelters daily, and left bowls of food on the back porch, hoping his sense of direction would bring him home. On the 12th morning, before the sun had fully broken over the horizon, I glanced out the living room window. There, sitting perfectly upright on the front porch, was Shadow. I should have been overcome with joy, but a primal instinct screamed at me to stop. Shadow was sitting completely still, rigid as a stone statue. Dogs, especially hyperactive mutts like him, don't hold perfectly still. His mouth was tightly closed and he wasn't panting despite the humid morning air. Most unsettling of all, after 12 days in the wild, his coat was immaculately clean. Not a speck of dirt, not a single mat in his fur. He was pristine. My mother came downstairs, saw him, and gasped with delight, immediately reaching for the front door handle. "Mom, wait. Don't open it," I yelled, grabbing her arm. As if reacting to my voice, the dog stood up. But it didn't stand the way a canine stands. Its rear legs locked tightly, then its front legs levered its body upward in a jarring, mechanical motion, like a poorly manipulated puppet. Its head swiveled toward us with a sickeningly unnatural angle, and its eyes were completely flat, solid black pools that completely absorbed the morning light. Ignoring my warnings, my mother opened the door and reached out to pat his head. In a flash, the entity snapped at her hand, its teeth clicking together mere inches from her fingers. My father rushed down the stairs, brandishing a baseball bat, screaming at it to get out. The entity masquerading as Shadow tilted its head, its jaw unhinging far wider than any biological dog's jaw should ever be allowed to open. From its throat, a sound tore through the quiet morning. It wasn't a bark or a growl. It was a guttural, distorted human voice trying to pronounce my name. "Logan," it rasped. My father slammed the door shut. Through the window, we watched the creature retreat to the edge of the yard. It stopped, lifted its front paws, and awkwardly tried to balance itself on its hind legs like a human being, wobbling for 3 agonizing seconds before dropping back down and bounding over the neighbor's high fence in a single, unnatural leap. We left for a hotel that very morning. My grandfather arrived the next day, burning sage and washing the threshold, but his words firmly sealed our grief. "Your dog died out there in the woods. Something else found his form, wore his skin, and waited for you to invite it inside." We tried to bury that trauma, pretending it was nothing more than a rabid animal encounter. I grew up, moved away, and joined search and rescue, successfully burying the nightmares in the deepest corners of my mind. But 15 years later, a frantic 4:30 a.m. dispatch call concerning a missing solo hiker in the high-altitude Sleeping Ute trails brought every single ounce of that childhood horror screaming back into reality. And this time, the entity wasn't hiding behind the skin of an animal. End of part 1. Part 2. The call that pulled me back into the nightmare came at exactly 4:47 a.m. on a bitter Saturday morning in October. My phone vibrated violently against my bedside table, displaying the name of Chief Miller, the head of our local search and rescue unit. He was a veteran woodsman who had pulled dozens of hikers out of the treacherous mountain ranges, a man whose voice rarely carried an ounce of panic. But that morning, his tone was tightly coiled with urgency. "Logan, wake up. We've got a missing person case," Miller said, his breath rattling through the receiver. A local school teacher, 32 years old, went out for a solo day hike on Thursday afternoon near the jagged peaks of Razorback Ridge. He was supposed to check in with his family yesterday morning. His wife called it in when he never showed up. The temperature dropped into the low 30s last night. "We are looking at a minimum of 48 hours of severe exposure." I was already pulling on my heavy hiking boots and tactical pants before he could finish the sentence. "I'll be at the staging area in 20 minutes, I replied. The staging area was a desolate, gravel pull-off just past the forest boundary line. When I pulled up, 4 trucks were already parked, their headlights cutting through the thick morning fog. A small team of seasoned volunteers, along with a tracking specialist named Marcus and his German Shepherd Hunter, were gathered around the hood of Miller's vehicle. A massive topographical map was spread across the metal surface. "All right, Logan, glad you're here," Chief Miller said, pointing a calloused finger toward a deeply contoured grid marked in red ink. The hiker's truck was located at the trailhead. Doors locked, keys left on the console, absolutely no signs of a forced entry or a struggle. His wife says he knows these trails well, hikes them once a month. But here is where it gets highly unusual. 2 cattle ranchers reported severe livestock mutilations in this exact valley over the past 72 hours. 3 young calves were ripped apart. Their internal organs were surgically extracted, but no meat was consumed. Marcus cleared his throat, his face grim. "The wildlife authorities are calling it a mountain lion officially, but the ranchers are completely spooked. One of them found strange footprints near the carcass. He said they looked like bare human feet, tracking straight toward a barbed wire fence. But on the exact other side of the wire, the human tracks completely vanished. There was nothing left but the deep paw prints of a massive coyote." A cold shiver traveled down my spine, instantly reminding me of my grandfather's ancient warnings. I shook the thought from my head, convincing myself that we were dealing with a standard rescue operation and an aggressive predator. We quickly divided into small tactical teams. I took the western flank, paired with Marcus and his tracking dog, while Chief Miller led the northern sweep. The lower half of Razorback Ridge was a well-maintained dirt path, but as we ascended higher into the elevation, the terrain grew brutally unforgiving. The trail narrowed into jagged ridges with sheer 1,000-foot drops on either side. About 2 miles into the dense pine canopy, Hunter suddenly froze. The dog's ears pinned back tightly against his skull, and a low, panicked whine escaped his throat. "What is it, boy? You got a scent?" Marcus whispered, gripping the leash tightly. Hunter refused to move forward. He took 3 deliberate steps backward, his entire body trembling with an intense, primal fear. Marcus looked at me thoroughly baffled. This isn't like him, Logan. Hunter has tracked timber wolves and mountain lions without ever batting an eye. Whatever he is smelling right now, it's absolutely terrifying him. Let me check ahead, I said, unholstering my tactical knife just to feel the weight of something defensive in my hand. I rounded a massive granite boulder that blocked the path, and the air immediately changed. It was as if I had walked directly into a meat locker. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees in a single step, making my breath instantly fog in the air. A sickening, coppery odor of blood mixed with a strange, medicinal herbal scent hung heavily in the air. I looked down at the trail. The dirt had been deeply disturbed, but not by human boots. It looked as though a heavy sack had been dragged across the ground in bizarre, interlocking circles, almost as if something had been dancing or pacing erratically. I blinked, rubbing my eyes from the freezing cold, and when I looked down a second time, the tracks were completely gone. The dirt looked perfectly smooth, undisturbed by any passage. Only the freezing cold and the foul stench remained. We pushed forward, forcing the reluctant tracking dog to keep the pace. Another mile up the mountain, we discovered the first physical clue. A heavy aluminum water bottle, partially buried beneath a pile of crisp autumn leaves. I knelt down to inspect it, and a profound sense of unease washed over me. The water bottle hadn't been dropped by a panicked, dehydrated hiker. It had been placed with deliberate, meticulous precision. The cap was screwed on perfectly straight, and it was standing completely upright underneath the leaves, arranged like a malicious breadcrumb meant to lead us further into the isolated peaks. The deeper we marched into the backcountry, the more suffocating the environment became. The natural sounds of the forest completely died out. There were no birds chirping, no insects humming, and no wind rustling through the pines. There was only a heavy, claustrophobic silence that made our own heartbeats sound deafening. At exactly 10:23 a.m., the radio on my chest crackled to life with static. It was the northern team. Logan, Marcus, come in. We have visual contact. We found him on the upper edge of the box canyon. He is alive. An immense wave of professional relief flooded my chest. Copy that, I breathed into the radio. What is his physical condition? There was a long, unsettling pause on the other end before the volunteer replied. He's walking. He looks somewhat disoriented, but he is completely mobile. We are escorting him down to the clearing now. Marcus and I altered our course immediately, scrambling through dense, thorn brush to reach the canyon clearing. As we tore through the final thicket, I caught sight of the missing hiker sitting on a flat boulder. He was wrapped in a bright orange emergency blanket, holding a canteen. He had dark, shoulder-length hair tied neatly back, and he looked entirely uninjured. But as I drew closer, my professional instincts shifted from relief to absolute suspicion. He had been lost in a freezing, predator-filled wilderness for over 48 hours, yet his heavy canvas jacket and jeans were immaculately clean. There was no mud on his boots, no tears in his clothing, and not a single scratch on his exposed skin. He looked like he had just stepped out of a retail store. One of our younger volunteers was kneeling beside him, speaking gently. Just take it easy, sir. We are going to get you safely back down to your family. I am perfectly fine, the man replied. The voice sent a jolt of ice directly into my stomach. The words were structurally perfect, but the delivery was entirely hollow. There was no tremor of exhaustion, no gasping for air, and absolutely no emotional relief at being rescued. It sounded like a digital recording playing out of a human mouth. I stepped into the clearing, pulling out my medical diagnostic kit. Hello, sir. My name is Logan, I'm the Wilderness EMT. I just need to perform a rapid evaluation to ensure you're stable enough for the hike down. The man turned his head toward me. His eyes were a deep, ordinary brown, but as I looked into them, a sickening realization began to dawn on me. There was absolutely nothing behind them. It was like staring into the glazed, vacant eyes of a taxidermy animal. There was no human spark, no consciousness, just a vast, empty void masquerading as a man. End of part 2. Part 3. I knelt in front of him on the cold earth, my heart hammering against my ribs as I pulled a small penlight from my chest pocket. Look straight ahead for me, I said, keeping my voice as professional as possible. I'm just going to check your pupillary response. The man stared blankly forward, his gaze cutting right through me. I clicked the light on and swept the beam across his right eye, then his left. The pupils constricted perfectly, a textbook physiological reaction. But something was horribly wrong. The bright light didn't cause his eyes to water, and he didn't reflexively flinch. In fact, he didn't blink at all. I sat there on my knees, counting the seconds in my head. 30 seconds. 45 seconds. A full minute passed. His eyes remained wide, completely fixed on a random point over my left shoulder. "Sir," I whispered, my hand beginning to tremble slightly. "You can blink." The moment the words left my mouth, his eyelids snapped shut and opened again in a rigid, sudden motion. It wasn't a natural reflex. It looked like he had just remembered that blinking was something humans were supposed to do, so he manually executed the command. "How long have you been without water?" I asked, reaching out to take his wrist. "I do not know. A day perhaps," he replied. His voice maintained that same flat, rhythmic cadence, entirely devoid of any human inflection. "Are you experiencing any severe thirst or dizziness?" "I am fine." I pressed my fingers against his radial artery to check his pulse, expecting the elevated heart rate of someone who had survived 2 freezing nights in the wilderness. I looked down at my watch. 60 beats per minute. Perfectly rhythmic. Perfectly steady. It was the resting heart rate of an athlete asleep in bed, not a traumatized hiker who had just been pulled from the brink of death. "Can you tell me exactly what happened out here?" I pressed, trying to force a natural human reaction out of him. "How did you manage to get so far off the main trail?" He blinked again, that same deliberate, artificial blink. "I went off the designated path to chase a deer. I wanted to capture a photograph. Then I became confused. I lost my communication device. I wandered." The vocabulary he chose felt incredibly clinical, like a machine trying to piece together a plausible story based on a textbook definition of getting lost. But the detail that made my breath catch in my throat was his breathing. It was 30 degrees in the shadow of that canyon. Every volunteer in our rescue group was exhaling thick plumes of white vapor. But as this man spoke, the air coming out of his mouth was completely invisible. There was no warmth to it. I forced myself to stand up, backing away slowly. Physically, his vitals are completely stable. No immediate signs of hypothermia or severe dehydration. "Let's get him down the mountain to the medical transport." "Sounds like a plan," Chief Miller said, waving the team forward. "Let's move out while we still have clear visibility." "Can you walk, sir?" "Yes," the man said. He stood up from the boulder. There was no hesitation, no stiffness from spending 48 hours on frozen ground, and no stretching of tight muscles. He simply levered his torso upright in a single fluid line. One of our younger volunteers, a girl named Maya, stepped forward and offered him a chocolate protein bar from her pack. "You must be absolutely starving. Eat this, it'll help keep your energy up for the trek down." "No thank you," he said, staring at the wrapper. "Are you sure? You haven't eaten in 2 days." "I am fine." We began the long descent back toward the staging area. The man walked directly in the center of our formation, flanked tightly by Marcus and another experienced volunteer. I purposely held back, intentionally trailing about 10 paces behind the group so I could closely observe him. Maya fell into step right next to me, adjusting her heavy backpack. "Logan," she whispered, leaning closer so her voice wouldn't carry. "Do you think he's suffering from some kind of profound psychological shock? Something about the way he's carrying himself is giving me serious chills." I kept my eyes glued to the back of his head. "People react to trauma in strange ways, Maya. Let's just focus on getting him down safely." But I knew it wasn't trauma. As I watched him navigate the treacherous trail, the terror in my chest grew absolute. The path was a chaotic mess of exposed tree roots, loose gravel and jagged stones. Every single member of our search team, people who hike these mountains for a living, tripped or stumbled at least once, constantly shifting their weight to maintain balance. But not him. He moved over the hazardous terrain as if he were gliding across a perfectly flat, polished hardwood floor. He never lowered his gaze to look at his feet. His legs simply rose and fell in a perfectly rhythmic, unchanging stride, his boots landing with flawless precision on the sturdiest rocks every single time. He wasn't even sweating. We were all panting under the weight of our tactical gear, our faces flushed from the intense exertion. His skin remained perfectly pale, dry and cool. "Sir," I called out loudly, testing him. "How is your energy holding up? Do you require a brief rest?" He stopped instantly. He didn't turn his shoulders or pivot his hips to look back at me. Instead, he simply rotated his neck. His head swiveled around to face me at an angle that was at least 10 degrees further than any normal human neck should ever be able to turn comfortably. "I am fine," he stated. Chief Miller, noticing the bizarre tension in the air, raised his hand to halt the line. "Actually, let's take a quick 5-minute breather right here. Everyone hydrate and check your equipment." The rescue team gathered in a small, sunlit clearing, drinking water and whispering quietly among themselves. The man stood entirely separate from the group, positioned at the very edge of the tree line, staring deeply into the thick, dark woods. Marcus walked over to me, leading his German shepherd. Hunter's tail was tucked completely between his hind legs, and he was actively pulling against the leash, trying to put as much distance between himself and the man as possible. "The dog won't go anywhere near him," Marcus muttered under his breath, his eyes wide with anxiety. "Hunter has been tracking at maximum distance ever since we found the guy. He's completely terrified of him, Logan." I swallowed hard, stepping away from Marcus, and deliberately walked over to stand right next to the man at the edge of the woods. The air around him still carried that bizarre meat locker chill. "Your family is going to be incredibly relieved to see you," I said, watching his profile. He didn't respond. He just kept staring into the trees. "Sir?" I pushed. This time, he rotated his entire body to face me, as if suddenly remembering that this was the natural way humans turned. A terrifying, mechanical smile spread across his face. It was entirely artificial, the corners of his mouth pulled upward, but the expression never reached his dead, empty eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice dropping into a slightly deeper pitch. "My family will be highly pleased by my return." End of Part 3. Part 4. "All right team, break's over," Chief Miller called out, strapping his radio back to his tactical vest. "We've got about 3 miles left until we hit the trailhead. Let's keep a steady pace." We fell back into formation. But the further down the mountain we went, the more the atmospheric dread seemed to thicken. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the man. I began to notice subtle, microscopic details that defied reality. The midday sun was high now, filtering through the golden autumn canopy and casting long, sharp shadows across the dirt trail. As I watched the man step over a fallen pine log, my blood turned to pure ice. His shadow didn't match his body. It seemed to lag behind his physical form by a fraction of a second, struggling to keep up with his movements. When he cleared the log, his shadow didn't jump with him. It seemed to fluidly pool and stretch across the bark like a thick, living liquid before snapping back into place beneath his boots. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself that the shifting forest light was playing tricks on my sleep-deprived mind. But deep down I knew better. We were roughly a mile from the forest boundary when Marcus's dog, Hunter, completely lost control. The German shepherd began to thrash wildly against his tactical harness, let out a series of frantic, panicked yelps, and tried to sprint backward up the trail. He was desperate to escape. "Easy, Hunter. Heel boy," Marcus shouted, digging his boots into the dirt to keep the massive dog from pulling him over. "What the hell has gotten into you?" The man stopped walking. He slowly turned his torso toward the thrashing animal. The moment the man's vacant, dead eyes locked onto the German shepherd, Hunter went dead silent. It wasn't a calm silence, it was a paralysis of absolute terror. The dog's mouth remained wide open in a frozen yelp, his muscles tensed violently, and his ears flattened against his skull. He was actively trying to scream, but absolutely no sound could escape his throat. It was as if the man had entirely severed the animal's ability to vocalize. "Ah, you okay there, buddy?" Marcus muttered, his face draining of color as he pulled the frozen, trembling dog closer to his side. The man's mouth warped into another wide, synthetic smile. The skin around his cheeks stretched so tightly that I expected it to tear away from the bone. "Dogs do not have an affinity for me," the man said. The flat, digital cadence of his voice was gone, replaced by a strange, mocking tone. I stepped forward, my hand resting firmly on the handle of my tactical knife. "And why is that?" I demanded, locking my eyes onto his vacant stare. "They can perceive it," he replied smoothly. "Perceive what?" "That I am not functioning correctly." The words hung in the freezing, stagnant air of the forest. Nobody breathed. None of the volunteers moved. The sheer, unadulterated wrongness of his statement sent a wave of primal panic through the entire rescue unit. Then, just as suddenly as the tension had built, the man let out a perfectly normal, booming human laugh. He shook his head playfully, his posture instantly softening. "I am merely jesting, of course. I suffered a severe canine bite during my youth. Domesticated animals always pick up on my residual anxiety." The sudden injection of genuine human emotion into his voice was jarring. It was too abrupt, too perfect, like an actor hitting a cue after a bad rehearsal. Chief Miller cleared his throat nervously, clearly eager to be rid of the bizarre hiker. "Right. Well, let's just keep moving. We're almost out of the woods." The moment the man turned his back and walked 30 feet ahead, Hunter finally let out a piercing, high-pitched whine, his vocal cords snapping back into operation. The dog refused to walk on the trail, forcing Marcus to drag him through the dense brush on the extreme perimeter of our group. The final half-mile of the trek felt entirely endless. My grandfather's voice echoed like a siren inside my skull, repeating the warning he had given me when I was 10 years old. If you see something that doesn't move right, that doesn't sound right, you run. Because it's not them anymore. But I couldn't run. I was a wilderness EMT, bound by professional duty, and I had a trail of volunteers following me. I had no choice but to escort this skin-clad nightmare straight out of the wilderness and into the civilized world. At exactly 12:15 p.m., we finally broke through the tree line and entered the gravel parking lot of the staging area. The man's heavy pickup truck was still sitting there, exactly where he had left it on Thursday afternoon, with his keys still locked inside the center console. Chief Miller immediately walked over to his radio to contact the local medical facility in town, informing them that we were bringing the missing hiker in for a standard post-rescue evaluation. "It's policy, sir," Miller explained to the man. "We just need the medical staff to give you a thorough checkup before we release you to your family." The man didn't argue. He didn't ask to see his wife, and he didn't request to go straight home. He simply gave a rigid, compliant nod and climbed into the back seat of a local sheriff's patrol vehicle that had arrived to assist us. I stood by my truck, packing away my medical gear, and watched him through the tinted glass of the police cruiser. He sat perfectly upright, his hands folded neatly in his lap, staring completely straight ahead. He didn't look at the scenery, he didn't fidget, and he didn't blink. He just sat there like a mannequin waiting to be unloaded. "Hell of a lucky find, Logan," Marcus said, walking up beside me and clapping a heavy hand onto my shoulder. Hunter was tightly curled at his feet, still shivering. If we hadn't tracked him down this morning, that guy would have undoubtedly frozen to death tonight. "Yeah," I murmured, my voice entirely hollow as I watched the patrol car pull out of the gravel lot and accelerate down the highway. Lucky. But deep in the pit of my stomach, a horrifying certainty told me that luck had absolutely nothing to do with it. Whatever entity we had encountered on the jagged peaks of that mountain, it wanted to be found. It had intentionally left that upright water bottle beneath the leaves like a trap. It had waited patiently in the freezing cold for us to arrive. And now, completely blind to the horror we had unleashed, we were driving it straight into the heart of our town. End of Part 4. Part 5. I followed the patrol vehicle down the winding mountain highway in my own truck, the tires humming rhythmically against the asphalt. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A dozen times I reached for my phone to call my grandfather, but each time I hesitated. What would I even say? "Grandpa, we found a missing hiker, but I think he's the same entity that took our dog 15 years ago because he doesn't blink right." They would have stripped me of my EMT certification and put me on a psychological hold before the sun went down. When we arrived at the regional medical center, the afternoon sun was casting long, cold shadows across the concrete. I walked into the triage area under the guise of completing my search and rescue paperwork, but my real objective was to stay close to the man. An hour into the evaluation, a veteran nurse named Carla, a woman I had worked alongside on dozens of emergency cases, stepped out of the examination room. She looked thoroughly perplexed, holding a digital clipboard with a deep frown etched into her face. She noticed me standing by the nurse's station and walked over, leaning over the counter to lower her voice. "Logan, what exactly did you guys say this man went through out there?" 48 hours of minimum exposure on the high ridges," I replied, leaning in. "What? What's wrong with him?" "Everything and nothing," Carla whispered, shaking her head. "I just ran his full vitals for the third time because I thought my equipment was malfunctioning. His body temperature is exactly 98.6 degrees. Not 98.5, not 98.7. It is perfectly fluid with absolutely zero natural fluctuation. And his blood pressure? 120/80. Every single time I pump the cuff, it registers the exact same ideal numbers. His resting heart rate is a dead steady 60 beats per minute. Logan, nobody coming out of a freezing mountain range has perfect textbook numbers like that. It's like someone programmed a computer with the ideal human metrics and shoved it into a suit." A wave of nausea washed over me. "What about dehydration? Frostbite?" "None," Carla said, her voice laced with deep unease. "His skin is perfectly hydrated. No muscle stiffness, no elevated cortisol or stress hormones in his blood work. The attending physician thinks he's just an incredibly resilient anomaly. They're preparing his discharge papers now." Before I could respond, the heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open, and a woman rushed into the clinic. It was Chloe, the man's wife. She was a local elementary school teacher, her long hair pulled back into a messy braid, her eyes red and swollen from days of crying. Behind her trailed their 2 young children, a daughter around 8 years old and a little boy no older than 6. "Where is he? Where is my husband?" Chloe cried out, her voice breaking. Carla immediately guided her toward the examination room. I followed a few paces behind, unable to look away from the impending collision between a desperate family and the entity we had brought down from the mountain. Chloe burst through the door, letting out a sob of pure relief. "Oh my God, honey. I was so terrified I thought I'd lost you." She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder. The man sat on the edge of the examination bed, his torso remaining completely rigid under her weight. "I am perfectly fine," he stated. Chloe froze. The absolute lack of warmth in his voice made her pull back slightly, her hands resting on his cheeks as she scanned his face. I watched her expression shift from profound relief to a sudden, jarring confusion. You look different," she whispered, her brow furrowing. "I have endured a difficult period in the wilderness," the man replied, his mouth twisting into that familiar, synthetic smile. "No, it's not that," Chloe murmured, her fingers tracing his jawline. I saw her visibly flinch, her hand twitching away as if his skin felt wrong to the touch. "You look younger, cleaner. Did the doctors give you some kind of intensive treatment?" The attending physician smiled warmly from the corner. "Just some basic fluids and a period of observation, ma'am. Your husband is in remarkably pristine shape." Chloe didn't look convinced. She turned back toward the doorway, waving her trembling hands at the children. "Come here, kids. Come say hello to your father." But the children didn't move. They remained huddled together near the doorframe, their small fingers gripping each other's jackets. The little boy, Leo, looked up at his sister with wide, frightened eyes, actively trying to hide behind her small frame. The daughter, Maya, took a deliberate step backward into the hallway the moment the man's vacant, brown eyes swiveled toward her. "Hello, Leo." "Hello, Maya," the man said. The words were structurally perfect, but the tone was incredibly formal, carrying the chilling, mechanical weight of a stranger reciting a script. Chloe noticed the strange behavioral barrier, but she forced a nervous laugh, shaking it off as residual shock. "Let's get you packed up and home, honey. You must be completely exhausted." An hour later, the discharge was finalized. I stood near the clinic exit, watching the family walk out into the parking lot. Chloe was talking animatedly, trying to fill the heavy silence, while the man walked right beside her, staring straight ahead without adjusting his stride. The 2 children walked a full 5 paces behind them, completely silent, their eyes locked onto the ground. As they reached their minivan, I overheard the little girl whisper to her mother, her voice trembling in the crisp afternoon air. "Mommy, why does Daddy smell like old pennies and dirt?" "Shoo, sweetie," Chloe snapped gently, her own voice tightly strained. "He's just been lost in the deep woods for 2 days. Everything will be fine once we get him home." I watched their taillights fade into the evening traffic, a suffocating weight settling over my chest. Missing hiker found safe. Everyone goes home. Case closed. That was the official narrative. But as I drove back to my dark, empty apartment, my mind was racing out of control. I spent the next several hours sitting at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the dark room as I dug through Chloe's public social media profiles. I scrolled through years of family photos, vacations, and birthday parties. The man in those older photos was vibrant. He smiled with his entire face, deep crinkle lines forming around his eyes. He held his children with genuine warmth, and his posture was relaxed, fundamentally human. But the entity we had pulled from the box canyon possessed none of that internal light. It had the exact same face, the exact same measurements, and the exact same voice, but the essential human soul had been entirely hollowed out. By 3 a.m., I finally shut the laptop, rubbing my throbbing temples. I tried to convince myself that I was letting my childhood trauma warp my professional judgment. Prolonged isolation in the wilderness can do bizarre things to a person's psyche. Dissociation, severe psychological shock, extreme survival adaptation. Those were the rational explanations. If something was truly wrong, his own wife would have noticed, right? She wouldn't have driven him straight to their home and locked the doors. I was entirely wrong. And the town was about to pay a horrific price for my silence. End of Part 5. Part 6. 3 weeks passed. The mountain range froze over with the first heavy snow of the season, effectively ending our routine search and rescue operations. I tried to force myself back into a normal routine, desperate to believe that the man we rescued was simply recovering from profound psychological trauma. But the illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when I ran into Chief Miller at a local hardware store on the edge of town. He was loading heavy wooden fence posts into the back of his truck, his face pale and weathered. When he noticed me walking out of the aisle, he paused, wiping his brow with a trembling hand. He looked around carefully, ensuring no other customers were within earshot, before leaning in close. "Logan," he said, his voice dropping into a tense, gravelly whisper. "Have you heard anything about the situation down at the teacher's house?" My chest tightened instantly. "No. What's going on, Chief?" "Chloe called the sheriff's department late last night," Miller murmured, his eyes darting toward the store entrance. "She was absolutely hysterical. She claimed her husband has been acting completely volatile since we brought him down from Razorback Ridge. She said he doesn't sleep. Not even for an hour. She woke up at 2 in the morning last week and found him standing completely rigid at the foot of their bed, staring down at her in the pitch black. He wasn't moving, he wasn't breathing, and he didn't blink for the 20 minutes she lay there petrified. A cold sweat broke out across my neck. What did the sheriff do?" "Not much they can do legally," Miller sighed, shaking his head. "The guy hasn't broken any laws and he isn't being physically violent. They suggested she take him to a neurological specialist to check for a hidden brain injury or extreme PTSD from the exposure. But Deputy Sarah went out there this morning just to conduct a standard wellness check. She called me right afterward, Logan. She was completely rattled." Miller stepped closer, his breath hitching. "Sarah said the guy answered the door, perfectly polite, cooperative, and smiling. But she said walking into that house felt like stepping directly into a commercial freezer. The heating system was completely turned off, every single window in the house was propped wide open, and it's 30 degrees outside. The 2 kids were sitting on the living room couch wearing full winter coats and gloves, shivering in their own home. And there's more." "Tell me," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Chloe told Sarah that he refuses to consume any food. It's been 3 weeks, Logan. 3 weeks without a single bite of solid food or a drop of water. She's tried cooking his favorite meals, buying takeout, ordering delivery, he won't touch any of it. He just sits in a wooden chair in the corner of the dining room all night long, facing the blank wall, waiting for the sun to come up." I wanted to speak. The truth was tearing at my throat, begging to be let out. I wanted to tell Miller about my grandfather's warnings, about the scratching on the window screen from my childhood, and about the horrific entity that had worn our dog's skin. But the sheer absurdity of it choked me. Instead, I swallowed the truth down. It has to be a profound psychological break," I lied, my voice cracking. "Severe wilderness survival can shatter a man's mind." "Yeah," Miller muttered, though his eyes carried an absolute lack of conviction. "Maybe." Over the next month, the whispers through our small-town grapevine grew increasingly sinister. We lived in a tight-knit community where secrets died quickly, and the horror unfolding inside that household was becoming impossible to contain. By late November, Chloe had abruptly packed up their belongings and taken the children to stay at her sister's house in a neighboring county. Officially, she told the school district that her husband needed total isolation to undergo an intensive psychological recovery program. But the real story leaked out through her sister. The children were completely terrified of their own father. The little girl, Maya, had woken up in the middle of a thunderstorm to find the man standing directly in her bedroom doorway. He wasn't comforting her. He was standing completely still, stretching his jaw wide open into that horrific synthetic smile in the dark. Maya swore to her mother that when the lightning flashed through the window, her father's eyes didn't look human. They reflected the light with a bright, luminous glare, exactly like the eyes of a predatory cat hunting in the night. Shortly after his family fled, the man was fired from his teaching position at the local district. One of his former co-workers met me at a local diner, eager to unload the dread that had infected the school staff. "It wasn't any single aggressive action, Logan," the teacher told me, gripping his coffee mug with white knuckles. "It was just, everything about his presence was entirely wrong. He would sit at his desk during free periods for 4 hours straight without making a single movement. He didn't check his computer, he didn't grade papers, he didn't look at his phone. He just sat there, perfectly motionless, watching the door. And the way he studied the students, it was like he was analyzing them, learning how to mimic their gestures. A janitor caught him alone in the administrative office early one morning, going through the student photo files. When the janitor asked what he was doing, the guy didn't even flinch. He just smiled and said, "I am practicing." The janitor asked, "Practicing what?" And the guy looked him dead in the eyes and whispered, "Practicing how to be normal." Every report felt like a heavy hammer striking my conscience. I was the one who had cleared him medically. I was the one who had allowed him to walk out of that canyon. By the spring of the following year, Chloe brought the kids back to the house. I don't know what fully convinced her to return. Perhaps she ran out of money, or perhaps the psychological manipulation of the entity had drawn her back. Humans have a desperate, tragic need to believe that things will eventually return to normal. She wanted her husband back and she wanted her children to have a father. She truly believed the nightmare was winding down. But the entity was merely done practicing. End of Part 6. Part 7. A devastating silence settled over the town as the seasons bled into one another. Months turned into a year and then two. The gossip columnists ran out of fresh rumors, and the local community did what human beings always do when faced with a lingering, uncomfortable dread: they chose to forget. They normalized the strange, pale man who occasionally walked the perimeter of his property at dawn, moving with that fluid, gliding stride. I stopped looking at Chloe's social media. I tried to convince myself that if a true monster was living under her roof, she wouldn't have stayed. The illusion of safety was permanently incinerated on a freezing, overcast Tuesday morning in November. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring a fresh cup of black coffee before my shift, when my phone vibrated violently on the counter. It was Deputy Sarah. I picked up, but before I could even say hello, the sound of her jagged, hyperventilating breaths filled the receiver. "Logan. Oh my God, Logan, turn on the local news channel right now," she sobbed. Her voice was completely stripped of its usual law enforcement authority, entirely choked with panic. "Just turn it on." "Sarah, calm down. What's happening?" I asked, a familiar, icy dread instantly freezing the blood in my veins. "Just turn it on," she screamed before the line went completely dead. My hands shook as I grabbed the television remote and flipped to our regional news network. The screen immediately cut away from the morning broadcast to a live aerial feed from a helicopter. Thick, billowing plumes of toxic black smoke were roaring into the early morning sky, completely choking out the sun. Beneath the smoke, a suburban house was being entirely consumed by massive, violent orange flames. The news anchor's voice was trembling. At the bottom of the screen, a breaking news banner flickered in bright red text. "Breaking news. Multiple fatalities reported in absolute house fire perimeter." Then the camera zoomed in on the street sign, and the exact house number flashed across the screen. It was their home. It was the house of the school teacher we had rescued from the mountain. "No, no, no," I whispered, the coffee mug slipping from my fingers and shattering across the kitchen floor, splashing dark liquid across my boots. I bolted out the front door, threw myself into my rescue truck, and drove toward the scene like a man possessed. When I arrived, the entire block had been barricaded by police cruisers and emergency vehicles. The heat radiating from the structure was intense enough to melt the plastic detailing on the nearby parked cars. Firefighters were actively spraying water into the roaring inferno, but it was entirely futile. The structural roof had already collapsed into the basement. I pushed past the perimeter tape, flashing my search and rescue badge at a rookie deputy who tried to block me. I found Sarah standing beside her patrol car, her face completely stained with soot and tears, her hands trembling so violently she couldn't properly holster her sidearm. "Sarah, tell me what happened," I demanded, grabbing her by the shoulders to force her to lock eyes with me. "Did anyone make it out?" She looked at me, her eyes wide, completely hollowed out by trauma. "They're dead, Logan. They're all dead. Chloe, little Leo, and Maya. The fire investigators, they managed to look through the rear master bedroom window before the structural roof collapsed." She choked back a violent sob, pressing her hands against her face. "It wasn't the smoke or the fire that killed them, Logan. They were already dead long before the acceleration match was struck. They each had a single, precise gunshot wound to the head while they were sleeping in their beds. And then, someone intentionally doused the entire perimeter in gasoline and set the house ablaze." My knees buckled. The world seemed to spin entirely out of focus. "And the husband? Did he take his own life in the fire?" "No," Sarah whispered, her voice dropping into a petrified hiss. "That's the worst part. His heavy pickup truck is parked right there in the gravel driveway. The keys are sitting right on the dashboard. But there is absolutely no sign of him. The state police deployed tracking hounds into the woods directly behind the backyard fence about 30 minutes ago." She leaned in closer, her teeth actively chattering from pure adrenaline. "Logan, the hounds wouldn't even cross the property line. The moment they got near the woods, they began to wildly thrash, baying in pure panic, turning on their handlers. One of the state troopers went into the brush on foot. He found footprints tracking deep into the dense snowy woods. Barefoot human footprints," I murmured, the words escaping my mouth before I could even think. Sarah stared at me, her face draining of what little color it had left. How did you know that? Yes. Perfectly formed, bare human footprints tracking straight through the freezing snow. But he said after about 50 yards, the stride length grew completely unnatural. The distance between each footprint was over 10 feet apart, as if he were bounding through the air. And then, right at the edge of the deep ridge, the human prints completely vanished into nothing. There was nothing left but the massive, overlapping tracks of a giant timber wolf. The official investigation wrapped up within a matter of days. The regional authorities, desperate to keep the peace and provide a rational explanation to a terrified public, concluded that the school teacher had suffered a catastrophic, delayed psychotic break due to severe wilderness trauma. They posited that he had murdered his family in a fit of absolute insanity, set fire to the evidence, and fled deep into the freezing mountain ranges where he undoubtedly succumbed to hypothermia or wildlife exposure. The case was ruled a closed murder-suicide and the town tried to heal. But I couldn't breathe in that town anymore. Every time I looked at the dark silhouette of Razorback Ridge looming over the horizon, I didn't see a beautiful mountain range. I saw a breeding ground for ancient, skin-stealing nightmares. I resigned from my position at San Juan Search and Rescue, packed my entire life into the back of my truck, and relocated to a densely populated apartment in Albuquerque, hoping the bright city lights would keep the darkness at bay. 2 years passed. I almost convinced myself that the nightmare was entirely over. Until my phone rang on a dark, rainy evening, and Chief Miller's heavy, gravelly voice came through the line. "Logan," Miller said, his voice completely dead, carrying the weight of a man who had just looked directly into the mouth of hell. "They just found something up on the Sleeping Ute trails. You need to listen to me very carefully." End of Part 7. Part 8. I sat upright in my chair, the plastic of my phone casing creaking under my grip. The sound of the Albuquerque rain lashing against my apartment window seemed to fade into a dull, distant buzz. "What did they find, Chief?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long, agonized silence on the other end. I could hear the distinct sound of Miller striking a lighter, followed by a long, heavy exhale of smoke. He had quit smoking 5 years ago. "The snow melted early on the northern face of the ridge this week," Miller began, his voice flat, completely stripped of its usual warmth. A couple of forestry technicians were clearing a blocked drainage path near the base of a deep limestone crevice. About 40 feet down, wedged tight between the rocks, they spotted a tattered piece of heavy canvas fabric. My breathing stopped. Heavy canvas. The exact material of the jacket the teacher had been wearing the day he disappeared into the woods. "They brought in a recovery team," Miller continued, his words coming slow, like he was forcing himself to read from a script he despised. "They pulled a body out of that crevice, Logan. Or rather, what was left of one. The freezing temperatures and the lack of oxygen down in that deep fissure had completely mummified the remains. The state forensic lab ran the dental records and the DNA profile this morning." Miller took another long, rattling drag of his cigarette. "It was him, Logan. It was the school teacher." I felt the room tilt. "What do you mean it was him? Chief, he died in that crevice? When?" "That's the part that's got the state examiners completely losing their minds," Miller whispered, his voice cracking with a terrifying realization. "The rate of tissue degradation, the specific mineral staining on his clothing, and the stomach contents. Logan, the medical examiner estimates he died within 3 hours of his initial disappearance. 2 years ago." The phone line went completely silent except for the steady, rhythmic patter of the rain outside. The pieces of the horrific puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The pristine, clean clothes. The textbook, unvarying vital signs. The complete lack of natural human reflexes. The absolute absence of warmth when he spoke or breathed. He had never survived those 48 hours on Razorback Ridge. The human being, the father, the husband, the teacher, had died alone in the freezing dark of that limestone crevice on the very first night he went missing. The entity hadn't stolen his skin after the rescue. It had found his fresh, lifeless body in the dark, memorized his face, mimicked his form, and walked out of that canyon wearing his identity like a perfectly tailored coat. We hadn't rescued a survivor. We had escorted a predator directly to his prey. "Logan? Are you still there?" Miller's voice broke through my paralysis, sounding incredibly old and fragile. "I'm here," I managed to choke out. "What about the footprints? The wolf tracks after the fire?" "The entity was done with that form," I muttered, answering my own question before Miller could respond. "The skin was burning. It didn't need it anymore." "There's one more thing," Miller said, his voice dropping so low I had to press the phone tightly against my ear to hear him over the storm. The forensic team searched the immediate area around the crevice. They found something else tucked inside a small hollowed-out cave directly above where the body was trapped. What? Dozens of personal items, Logan. Driver's licenses, wallets, wedding rings, old photographs, stretching back decades. Belonging to tourists, hikers, and locals who vanished into these mountains over the last 50 years. And right in the center of that hollow, sitting perfectly upright on a flat stone, was an old, faded red collar. My heart stopped. It had a tarnished metal tag on it, Miller whispered. The name engraved on it was Shadow. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the kitchen table. The room felt suddenly impossibly cold. The ancient entity my grandfather had warned me about hadn't just targeted that family. It had been hunting these mountains for generations, discarding one human identity the moment it wore out, practiced its mimicry, and then moved on to the next. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked over to the apartment window to draw the heavy curtains shut, desperate to block out the darkness of the city. But as my hand reached for the fabric, my eyes caught a reflection in the glass. Down on the street below, beneath the pale, flickering glow of a broken street lamp, a lone figure was standing in the pouring rain. The figure was completely still, unbothered by the downpour. It wore a heavy, dark coat with the hood pulled down, exposing pale skin. As I watched, petrified, the figure slowly tilted its neck upward, swiveling its head at a sharp, unnatural angle to look directly up at my third-floor window. Even through the thick glass and the driving rain, I could see its mouth warp into a wide, rigid, synthetic smile. Then a low, rhythmic sound began to echo from the street below, drifting up through the brick walls and the sealed window frame of my apartment. It was a sharp, clear sound, entirely flat and devoid of human emotion. Someone was whistling in the dark. End of part 8. And that brings us to the end of our terrifying journey. If this chilling account crawled under your skin, please take a moment to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another descent into the dark and the unexplained. What do you think is out there in the deep woods, waiting for its next skin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, when we pull back the curtain on a brand new nightmare, keep your doors locked, your windows shut, and never whistle after dark. Stay safe out there.